Sometimes the people who save your life are the ones you never expected to trust. Ethan Brooks had spent his entire adult life believing that control was the only thing separating order from chaos. At 42 years old, the white Korean Mafia boss had built a reputation that reached far beyond boardrooms and private negotiations. Calm, disciplined, and emotionally distant, he rarely spoke more than necessary and never allowed anyone to grow close enough to influence his decisions. Every trip, every meeting, and every minute of his schedule followed a carefully designed plan. That morning was supposed to be no different. The private aircraft carrying Ethan and a small group of passengers climbed steadily above a blanket of soft white clouds while the first golden light of sunrise painted the horizon. Most travelers relaxed quietly in their seats, reading books or looking through the windows. Across the aisle sat Jasmine Carter, a 27-year-old black maid returning home after visiting her mother during a short vacation. Her suitcase contained little more than neatly folded clothes, homemade cookies wrapped carefully in paper, and a handwritten note reminding her to keep smiling no matter how difficult life became. Yasmin thanked the flight attendant with genuine warmth as breakfast was served and politely helped an elderly passenger retrieve a small bag from the overhead compartment. She never imagined that a simple act of kindness would become one of the last ordinary moments of her day. Nearly an hour into the flight, the aircraft encountered severe turbulence. The seatbelt sign illuminated as the cabin gently shook beneath the growing storm clouds ahead. The captain's calm voice assured everyone that the crew was adjusting course around unstable weather, encouraging passengers to remain seated. Ethan quietly closed the business report resting on his lap and looked toward the window. His expression remained composed, but years of experience had taught him to notice details others ignored. The movement of the aircraft felt different now. It was not simply rough air. A few moments later another announcement came, still professional but noticeably more serious. The pilots explained that they were declaring an emergency and preparing for an immediate landing in a remote area after experiencing a critical mechanical problem. The cabin fell into complete silence. Some passengers reached for the hands of loved ones while others closed their eyes in quiet prayer. Yasmin took a slow breath, offered a reassuring smile to the frightened elderly woman seated beside her, and gently reminded her that the crew was trained for emergencies. Ethan noticed the quiet confidence in Jasmine's voice. Even as uncertainty filled the cabin, she focused on helping someone else feel safe. Outside the windows, towering evergreen forests stretched endlessly beneath the descending aircraft. The engines continued operating as the pilots carefully guided the plane toward a long clearing surrounded by mountains. The landing was rough but controlled, and after several tense moments the aircraft finally came to a complete stop. The silence that followed felt almost unreal. Ethan released a slow breath before unfastening his seatbelt. Around him, shaken passengers began checking on one another while crew members calmly directed everyone toward the exits. Once outside, the fresh mountain air replaced the tension inside the cabin. The aircraft rested in an isolated clearing surrounded by towering pine trees, distant hills, and complete wilderness with no visible roads nearby. Emergency communication equipment had been activated, but rescue teams would need time to reach such a remote location. Ethan stepped away from the aircraft and surveyed the quiet landscape with practiced composure. Across the clearing, Jasmine was already helping organize blankets, offering water to anxious travelers, and comforting frightened children with the same gentle kindness she had shown before the emergency. For the first time, Ethan truly looked at her. Their eyes met across the cool morning light, and neither of them spoke a single word. Yet somewhere between the silence of the forest and the uncertainty of what lay ahead, two strangers from completely different worlds realized that fate had quietly placed them on the same path. Morning sunlight gradually reached the clearing, filtering through the towering pine trees and warming the cool mountain air as passengers gathered near the aircraft under the careful guidance of the flight crew. The emergency landing had been successful, but everyone understood they remained far from any town or highway. The captain calmly explained that emergency transmitters were functioning correctly and rescue teams had already received their location, although difficult terrain and changing weather could delay their arrival. The announcement eased some fears, yet uncertainty still lingered across the quiet landscape. Ethan stood a short distance away, observing the surroundings with measured attention. His years of making difficult decisions had taught him that panic never solved problems. He quietly examined the tree line, the nearby stream visible beyond a cluster of rocks, and the open clearing that offered the best visibility for approaching helicopters. While many passengers remained seated on emergency blankets, Jasmine continued moving from one person to another with patient kindness. She offered bottled water, adjusted blankets around an elderly couple, reassured two frightened children by inventing a simple game to count birds flying overhead, and thanked every crew member for remaining calm despite the circumstances. Ethan noticed that she never tried to become the center of attention. She simply focused on making everyone around her feel a little safer. As the hours passed, the temperature slowly increased beneath the bright blue sky. A flight attendant asked for volunteers to help organize emergency supplies that had been removed from the aircraft. Before anyone else stepped forward, Jasmine smiled and offered her assistance. Ethan surprised himself by quietly joining her. Together they carried containers of drinking water, first aid supplies, flashlights, and packaged meals to a shaded area beneath several large trees where passengers could easily reach them. Their cooperation required very few words. Yasmin thanked him each time he lifted another heavy container, while Ethan simply nodded before returning for the next one. Eventually Jasmine smiled gently and said, "You seem to stay calm no matter what happens." Ethan looked toward the distant mountains before answering honestly. Panic makes difficult situations harder. Calm gives people another chance. Yasmin considered his words for a moment before replying, "Kindness does the same thing." Ethan glanced at her with a quiet curiosity. It was an answer he had not expected. The afternoon passed peacefully as everyone settled into a routine of waiting. Some passengers rested beneath the trees while others helped gather small branches for a safe signal fire prepared by the flight crew. Yasmin noticed a little girl sitting alone, missing her parents who were speaking with the captain nearby, so she quietly sat beside her and began folding colorful paper from an airline magazine into simple birds. Soon several children gathered around, smiling as they learned together. Ethan watched from a respectful distance. The sound of laughter echoed gently through the clearing, replacing fear with hope if only for a few moments. As the sun slowly drifted toward the western mountains, long shadows stretched across the forest floor. A crew member explained that rescue helicopters would continue searching until nightfall if weather conditions remained favorable. Ethan walked toward the edge of the clearing, studying the horizon once again. Moments later he heard quiet footsteps behind him. Yasmin had brought 2 bottles of water, offering one without saying anything unnecessary. Ethan accepted it with a grateful nod. Together they stood in comfortable silence, looking across the peaceful wilderness. Neither of them knew how long they would remain there, yet both sensed that the unexpected stillness surrounding them had already begun changing something neither could yet fully understand. The second morning in the wilderness arrived quietly, with the soft sunlight spreading across the mountain clearing and the gentle sound of birds replacing the uncertainty that had filled the previous day. The passengers had spent the night safely beneath temporary shelters created by the flight crew, and although everyone hoped rescue would arrive soon, the remote landscape reminded them that patience was necessary. Ethan woke before most of the others and walked toward the edge of the clearing, carefully observing the surrounding terrain. The cold Korean Mafia boss had always relied on preparation, planning, and control, but this environment offered none of the comforts he usually depended on. There were no assistants waiting with updates, no private office, and no carefully arranged schedule. For the first time in many years, Ethan was simply another person waiting for tomorrow. When he returned to the group, he noticed Jasmine already helping prepare breakfast supplies. She greeted him with the same calm smile she had shown since the emergency landing. "Good morning," she said. "I hope you were able to rest." Ethan looked slightly surprised by the question. Most people asked about his plans, his decisions, or his influence. Very few asked whether he was doing well. "I slept enough," he answered. Yasmin smiled. "That sounds like a very serious answer." For a moment, Ethan almost laughed. A simple observation revealed something about him that others rarely mentioned. He was always careful, always controlled, always carrying responsibilities that no one else could see. Throughout the morning, Ethan and Jasmine worked together to improve the temporary camp area. They organized supplies, checked the water containers, and helped passengers remain comfortable while waiting for rescue teams. Their differences became obvious with every passing hour. Ethan approached every task like a problem that required efficiency and structure. Yasmin approached every situation by considering the feelings of the people involved. Yet instead of conflicting, their approaches quietly balanced each other. When Ethan suggested arranging supplies according to priority, Jasmine agreed immediately but added a small section for personal items that helped passengers feel more comfortable, such as books, photographs, and small belongings recovered from the aircraft. Ethan looked at the collection and realized how much emotional value existed beyond practical needs. Later that afternoon, a young passenger became upset after losing a family photograph during the evacuation. Yasmin searched carefully through the available belongings until she found the picture folded inside a small travel bag. The child's expression changed instantly from worry to relief. Ethan watched the moment silently. He had spent years believing solutions came from intelligence, resources, and authority. Yasmin reminded him that sometimes the most important solutions came from patience and compassion. As the sun moved lower across the mountains, Ethan sat beside the stream reviewing the situation while Jasmine joined him with 2 cups of warm water. They looked across the peaceful forest, surrounded by tall trees and endless sky. "Do you always help people this much?" Ethan asked. Yasmin looked thoughtful before answering. "I think everyone is carrying something we cannot see. If I can make their day a little easier, then why would I not?" Ethan lowered his eyes, considering her words. In his world, trust was rare and kindness often came with expectations. Yet Jasmine offered both without asking for anything in return. The quiet moment between them felt different from the conversations he usually had. There was no negotiation, no hidden purpose, no reason to be guarded. Only 2 strangers sharing a peaceful afternoon in an unfamiliar place. As evening approached, a distant sound echoed above the mountains. Everyone looked toward the sky, hoping it was the rescue team they had been waiting for. But as the sound faded into the distance, Ethan and Jasmine remained standing together beneath the fading sunlight, realizing that the wilderness had already created a connection neither of them had expected. That evening, the mountain air turned noticeably cooler as soft gray clouds drifted across the fading sky, casting long shadows over the quiet clearing. The flight crew reassured everyone that the emergency beacon continued transmitting their location, but changing weather could delay rescue helicopters until the following morning. Instead of allowing discouragement to spread, Jasmine quietly suggested that everyone gather around the carefully maintained signal fire, sharing stories to keep their spirits strong. Families smiled, children listened with wide eyes, and even the most anxious passengers slowly relaxed beneath the comforting glow of the flames. Ethan remained slightly apart from the group, seated on a smooth fallen log while watching the peaceful scene unfold. For years he had believed leadership meant solving problems alone, yet Jasmine seemed to lead simply by helping people believe tomorrow would arrive with new hope. After the conversations gradually faded and many passengers settled beneath their emergency blankets, Jasmine walked toward the nearby stream carrying 2 metal cups filled with warm water that had been heated over the fire. She noticed Ethan studying the reflection of the stars beginning to appear above the mountains. Without interrupting his thoughts, she quietly offered him one of the cups before sitting a respectful distance away. For several peaceful moments neither of them spoke. The gentle sound of flowing water filled the silence more comfortably than words ever could. Finally Ethan broke the quiet. "Most people become afraid when everything familiar disappears," he said. "You somehow become calmer." Yasmin looked toward the moving water before answering softly. "My mother always told me that fear deserves respect, but it should never become the person making our decisions." Ethan slowly nodded. "Your mother sounds wise." Yasmin smiled warmly. "She worked hard her entire life. She never had much money, but she always believed kindness was something every person could afford. Ethan lowered his eyes toward the cup resting in his hands. I grew up believing that strength meant never depending on anyone. Yasmin turned toward him with gentle understanding rather than sympathy. Maybe strength also means allowing someone to stand beside you. An answer lingered between them long after she finished speaking. Ethan realized he had never shared personal thoughts so naturally with someone he had known for only a short time. In his world, conversations usually revolved around business, strategy, or responsibility. This was different. There were no expectations hidden beneath Jasmine's words, only quiet honesty. After another comfortable silence, Ethan looked across the peaceful wilderness surrounding them. When I was younger, he admitted, I convinced myself that keeping people at a distance protected everyone. Eventually it became a habit I forgot how to break. Yasmin listened without interruption. She did not offer advice or attempt to change his feelings. She simply remained beside him, allowing him the rare freedom to speak without fear of judgment. That simple act of listening carried more comfort than Ethan expected. Above them, countless stars slowly filled the clear night sky while the signal fire continued glowing in the distance. The mountain breeze carried the scent of pine trees through the quiet camp, reminding both of them how small the world could become when everything unnecessary disappeared. As they stood together to return toward the others, Ethan noticed something unfamiliar settling inside his heart. For the first time in many years, the silence no longer felt lonely. Walking beside Jasmine through the soft firelight, he quietly realized that although rescue had not yet arrived, he had already begun finding something far more unexpected than safety, and he could no longer imagine facing whatever came next without hoping she would still be walking beside him. The following morning arrived beneath a sky filled with dark gray clouds drifting slowly across the mountains, replacing the bright sunshine that had comforted everyone during the previous days. The cool breeze carried the scent of approaching rain through the towering pine trees, encouraging the flight crew to prepare the temporary camp for changing weather. Blankets were secured beneath the shelters, emergency supplies were carefully organized, and every passenger worked together without complaint. Ethan quietly coordinated practical tasks while Jasmine encouraged everyone with calm optimism, reminding frightened children that storms always passed. Watching her move through the camp, Ethan noticed something remarkable. She never ignored the seriousness of their situation, yet she somehow made every person believe they were strong enough to face it. By early afternoon, a steady rain began falling across the clearing. It was not dangerous, but it forced everyone to gather closer beneath the temporary shelters built from emergency equipment and waterproof materials. The sound of gentle rain striking the fabric roofs created an unexpected feeling of peace instead of fear. Families shared stories, children played simple games, and strangers who had boarded the aircraft as complete outsiders now laughed together as though they had known each other for years. Ethan sat quietly near the entrance of one shelter, watching Jasmine distribute warm drinks prepared over a portable stove provided by the flight crew. When she finally reached him, she handed him a steaming metal cup with a warm smile. You have spent more time helping everyone else than taking care of yourself, she said softly. Ethan looked at the cup before answering. I could probably say the same thing about you. Yasmin laughed gently. Maybe that is why we keep noticing each other. The simple honesty of her reply caught Ethan completely by surprise. For the first time in many years, he smiled without thinking about it. As the afternoon continued, the rain gradually became heavier, and the temperature dropped noticeably. A strong gust of wind shifted one corner of the nearest shelter, causing several passengers to quickly secure the support ropes together. Ethan immediately joined them, calmly reinforcing the structure while reassuring everyone that everything remained stable. Once the shelter was secure again, he turned to make sure Jasmine was safe. She stood only a few feet away, helping an elderly couple adjust their blankets before quietly thanking Ethan for his quick thinking. Their eyes met once again, but this time neither looked away immediately. Ethan suddenly realized that during every difficult moment since the emergency landing, his first instinct had become searching for Jasmine. The discovery unsettled him because it was completely unfamiliar. He had spent years believing emotional attachment created weakness. Yet standing beneath the gentle rhythm of falling rain, he understood that caring about another person's well-being did not make him weaker. It gave him a reason to become stronger. As evening approached, the rain finally slowed, leaving the forest washed clean beneath a quiet silver sky. Small drops of water rested on evergreen branches while distant mist drifted through the mountains, creating a breathtaking landscape unlike anything Ethan had ever paused long enough to appreciate. Yasmin stepped outside the shelter and looked toward the clearing, smiling at a single wildflower that had remained standing despite the rain. Ethan walked beside her without saying anything. After a long silence, he quietly admitted, "I used to believe survival meant protecting only myself." Yasmin gently looked toward him. "And now?" Ethan watched the tiny flower moving peacefully in the evening breeze before answering with complete honesty. "Now I think survival means making sure you are still here tomorrow." Yasmin did not respond immediately. Instead, she simply smiled with a quiet understanding, and in that peaceful moment Ethan realized there was one possibility that frightened him more than the uncertainty of rescue. He was no longer afraid of remaining lost in the wilderness. He was beginning to fear the day this unexpected journey with Jasmine might finally come to an end. The next sunrise arrived wrapped in brilliant golden light, transforming the mountain clearing into a place that felt almost peaceful despite the uncertainty that still surrounded everyone. The rain had disappeared during the night, leaving the pine trees sparkling with tiny drops of water while cool morning air carried the fresh scent of the forest. Passengers slowly emerged from their temporary shelters with renewed hope, encouraged by the clear sky above. The flight crew immediately checked the emergency transmitter once again and confirmed that its signal remained active. They believed the improved weather greatly increased the chances of rescue aircraft reaching the area before sunset. Those simple words lifted every heart in the camp, yet they stirred a different emotion inside Ethan. Only a few days earlier, he had wanted nothing more than to leave the wilderness behind. Now, for reasons he could no longer ignore, the thought of rescue also meant the possibility of saying goodbye to Jasmine. Throughout the morning they continued helping everyone around them. Ethan assisted the crew in organizing the landing area into a larger visible signal while Jasmine prepared breakfast and made certain every passenger had enough food and water. Their teamwork had become effortless. They no longer needed detailed conversations because each instinctively understood what the other intended to do. Several passengers quietly smiled as they watched them working together, noticing the quiet understanding that had grown between two people who had once been complete strangers. Around noon, a faint sound drifted through the valley. At first it seemed like distant wind moving across the mountains, but within seconds everyone stopped moving. The sound became clearer, rhythmic and unmistakable. A helicopter. Faces turned toward the bright blue sky while hopeful voices echoed across the clearing. Ethan looked upward, then immediately looked toward Jasmine instead. She had already begun helping the children gather near the open field so they would remain calm during the approaching rescue. Even in the moment everyone had been waiting for, her first thought remained the people around her. The rescue helicopter finally appeared beyond the mountain ridge, circling slowly before spotting the carefully prepared signal area. It hovered above the clearing while crew members below waved brightly colored emergency panels. Relief spread across every face as the aircraft safely identified their location before continuing communication with additional rescue teams expected to arrive shortly. Passengers embraced family members, thanked the flight crew, and quietly celebrated knowing the long wait was finally ending. Ethan should have felt the same overwhelming relief, yet another realization quietly settled inside him. Once they returned home, their worlds would separate again. He would return to endless meetings, guarded conversations, and responsibilities that never truly ended. Yasmin would return to her ordinary life built upon kindness and quiet service. The wilderness had erased every difference between them, but civilization might rebuild those walls. As everyone prepared for evacuation, Ethan walked toward the stream where he and Jasmine had shared so many peaceful conversations. A few moments later she joined him without saying anything. Together they watched sunlight dance across the flowing water while the distant sound of helicopter blades continued filling the valley. Ethan finally spoke with complete honesty. "A few days ago I wanted this moment more than anything." Yasmin smiled gently. "And now?" Ethan took a slow breath before answering. "Now I am grateful we are being rescued. But I am not ready to lose the person who reminded me how to live differently." Yasmin lowered her eyes for a moment before looking back at him with a quiet warmth. Before either of them could say another word, a rescue worker called everyone together for evacuation. Side by side they turned toward the waiting helicopter, both silently wondering whether the journey that had transformed their hearts was truly ending or whether it was only about to begin. The rescue helicopters carried every passenger safely back to civilization before sunset, and within hours the quiet mountain wilderness had become nothing more than a distant memory for everyone except Ethan and Jasmine. Medical teams completed routine examinations, investigators documented the emergency landing, and families embraced loved ones with overwhelming relief. Cameras gathered outside the regional airport hoping to interview survivors, but Ethan quietly declined every request before leaving through a private exit arranged by his security team. His assistants immediately surrounded him with updated schedules, confidential reports, and dozens of postponed meetings that demanded his attention. Only a week earlier he would have stepped naturally back into that familiar rhythm without hesitation. Instead, he found himself looking beyond the tinted window of his waiting vehicle, wondering where Jasmine was at that very moment. Meanwhile, Jasmine returned to Chicago carrying the same modest suitcase she had packed before the flight. Within 48 hours she was back at work, pushing her housekeeping cart through the polished hallways of the luxury hotel where she had quietly built her life. Her co-workers welcomed her warmly, grateful for her safe return, and guests continued greeting her with the same appreciation they always had. Outwardly everything appeared exactly as it had before the emergency landing, yet Jasmine occasionally caught herself pausing beside large windows whenever she noticed distant mountains in travel magazines or heard the sound of helicopters crossing the city skyline. Those memories no longer reminded her of fear. They reminded her of conversations beside a quiet stream and evenings beneath countless stars with a man whose guarded heart had slowly begun opening. Across the city, Ethan discovered that the life he had once considered normal now felt strangely incomplete. Boardroom discussions sounded louder but less meaningful. Expensive dinners felt emptier than simple meals shared around a signal fire. Even the luxurious silence inside his penthouse no longer offered comfort. One evening he stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago, watching thousands of lights stretch across the skyline. His trusted advisor quietly entered the room with another folder of business documents but hesitated after noticing Ethan's distant expression. "You have not been yourself since returning," the older man observed gently. Ethan remained silent for several moments before answering with unexpected honesty. "I spent years believing I understood what mattered. Then a few days in the mountains changed everything." The advisor nodded respectfully without asking further questions. He had known Ethan long enough to recognize that certain answers had to be discovered rather than explained. The following afternoon Ethan cancelled an important meeting for the first time in years. Instead of traveling to another corporate negotiation, he instructed his driver to take him to the Grand Meridian Hotel after quietly confirming Jasmine had returned to work. He arrived carrying no entourage, no assistants, and no symbols of influence beyond the simple charcoal suit he always wore. As he stepped into the elegant lobby, familiar sounds of rolling luggage, polite greetings, and soft piano music filled the air. Guests moved naturally through the spacious entrance while employees continued their daily routines. Then, across the polished marble floor, Ethan saw Jasmine arranging fresh flowers near the reception desk. She looked up almost at the exact same moment, and surprise slowly transformed into the warm smile he had carried with him every single day since leaving the mountains. For several quiet seconds neither of them moved. The busy hotel continued surrounding them, yet the world seemed to become wonderfully still once again. Ethan realized he had crossed far more than the distance between his office and the hotel. He had finally chosen to walk toward the one person he no longer wanted to lose, And this time there would be no wilderness forcing them together. Whatever happened next would be entirely their own choice. Jasmine stood quietly beside the arrangement of fresh white lilies, her warm smile growing even brighter as Ethan slowly approached across the polished marble floor. Neither of them seemed eager to speak first because both understood that the most meaningful moments rarely needed hurried words. Around them, guests continued checking into the hotel, luggage wheels rolled gently across the lobby, and soft piano music floated through the elegant space, yet everything beyond their shared glance seemed to fade into the background. Ethan finally stopped only a few feet away and smiled with a sincerity that would have surprised anyone who had known the distant man he had been only weeks earlier. "I hoped I would find you here," he admitted quietly. Yasmin looked at him with gentle warmth. "I had a feeling you might come back someday." Ethan glanced toward the bouquet of wildflowers resting in his hand. They were carefully arranged, simple, and remarkably different from the expensive floral displays that decorated the hotel. Yasmin recognized them immediately. They looked almost identical to the tiny flowers that had survived the rainstorm in the mountain clearing. Ethan noticed the recognition in her eyes before saying softly, "I searched for these because they reminded me of something important." Jasmine accepted the bouquet carefully, smiling as she gently touched the delicate petals. "They survived difficult weather," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "Just like we did." They shared a quiet laugh that carried none of the awkwardness often found between people reconnecting after time apart. Instead, the conversation flowed as naturally as it had beside the mountain stream. Ethan invited Jasmine to join him for coffee after her shift if she felt comfortable doing so. There was no pressure hidden behind the invitation, only genuine hope. Yasmin agreed with a calm smile, and later that afternoon they met at a small cafe overlooking the Chicago River. Unlike the exclusive restaurants Ethan had once reserved for business partners, this place was modest, peaceful, and filled with ordinary people enjoying quiet conversations. Ethan intentionally chose it because it reminded him of everything he had discovered during those unforgettable days in the wilderness. They spoke for hours without noticing the passing time. Jasmine shared stories about growing up with her mother, learning that dignity came from character rather than circumstances, and finding joy in simple acts of kindness. Ethan listened carefully before speaking about his own childhood, the responsibilities that had shaped his life, and the emotional walls he had built so high that even he had forgotten how to climb over them. Yasmin never interrupted. She simply listened with the same patience that had first earned his trust beneath the mountain sky. As evening approached, they walked together beside the river while the city lights slowly reflected across the calm water. Ethan realized that every conversation with Jasmine left him feeling lighter rather than exhausted. There were no negotiations to win, no reputation to protect, and no expectations to satisfy. For the first time in many years, he could simply be himself. They paused beside a quiet overlook where the skyline stretched across the horizon beneath the soft colors of sunset. Ethan turned toward Jasmine with a complete honesty. "I spent most of my life believing success meant building walls that no one could cross," he said. "Then you showed me that the strongest people are the ones brave enough to open a door instead." Jasmine's eyes reflected quiet emotion as she answered softly. "Sometimes all a person needs is someone willing to walk through that door with them." They continued their walk beneath the glowing evening sky, side by side, neither trying to define what their future would become. They only knew that the connection born in the silence of the mountains had continued growing in the ordinary rhythm of everyday life, and with every shared step, it became harder to imagine a future where they were no longer walking the same path together. Nearly 1 year passed before Ethan returned to the same mountain valley, this time beneath a peaceful spring sky instead of uncertain storm clouds. The rescue team had organized a quiet gathering to honor the professionalism of the flight crew and celebrate the courage shown by everyone who had endured those unforgettable days together. Passengers greeted one another like old friends, children who had once been frightened now laughed freely across the open meadow, and gratitude filled the fresh mountain air. Ethan arrived without the large security detail that had once followed him everywhere. He wanted this day to belong to memories rather than status. Yasmin stepped out of a shuttle bus moments later, carrying the same warm smile that had first caught his attention during the flight. When their eyes met, both smiled naturally, as though no time had passed at all. Together they walked toward the familiar stream where so many quiet conversations had changed the direction of their lives. The water still flowed gently over smooth stones, the towering pine trees still reached toward the bright blue sky, and wildflowers once again covered the nearby hillside with a simple beauty. Ethan paused beside the place where they had stood on the morning rescue helicopters finally appeared. He looked toward Jasmine before speaking with a complete honesty. I came here believing this place saved my life. Now I understand something different. It was not the mountains that changed me. It was meeting you. Yasmin smiled softly, her eyes reflecting quiet emotion. The mountains simply gave us enough silence to hear what our hearts had been trying to say. Ethan nodded slowly. For years I believed my future depended on power, control, and never letting anyone get close enough to matter. Then you showed me that trust is not something to fear. It is something worth protecting. They remained beside the flowing stream while the afternoon breeze carried the gentle scent of pine through the valley. No grand promises were needed because every important choice had already been made through countless small moments of patience, kindness, and honesty. Later that afternoon the gathering ended, and everyone prepared to return home. Before leaving, Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and removed the carefully folded handwritten note Jasmine had unknowingly dropped during the emergency evacuation months earlier. It was the same note her mother had written reminding her to keep smiling no matter how difficult life became. He had quietly found it while helping organize supplies and had kept it safe, hoping one day to return it personally. Yasmin accepted the note with a surprised gratitude before laughing gently. I thought I had lost this forever. Ethan smiled. Some things are too important to lose. As they walked back toward the waiting vehicles, Ethan reached for Jasmine's hand slowly enough to let her choose. Without hesitation, she placed her hand in his, and together they continued forward beneath the warm spring sunlight. The future waiting beyond the mountains remained unwritten, but neither of them feared it anymore. They had already survived uncertainty, discovered hope where none seemed possible, and learned that the strongest bond is never created by extraordinary promises. It is built one quiet choice at a time. As the valley disappeared behind them, Ethan realized there was only one promise he wanted to keep for the rest of his life. Wherever the road might lead, he would never willingly let go of the woman who had taught his guarded heart that love begins the moment fear no longer decides who deserves to stay.